Hello. So if you don't already know me, I'm Sam Parker, Jack's little sister. Jack was going to ask some of his friends to introduce him, but none of them could make it, so I'm backup. However, one of Jack's friends, Parker Smith, sends this message. Jack, on May 25th, when I lost control of my car and we crashed, you reacted with Eagle Scout calmness in my distress and saved my life. My family and I are forever grateful and thankful for your friendship. Now, I'd like to say a few words about Jack. He's a great older brother in general. He always is nice to me, and he really influences me. I like the same music he likes, I like the same video games, I even decided to play bass because of him. Here's the thing though, he's always asking me to come lift with him. Little comments like, hey Sam, how much can you bench? Hey Sam, how much can you squat? He also is always listening to metal. It could be while we're driving to school, which is pretty early to be listening to it. Normally I'm okay with metal, but at 7:30 in the morning, I'm not feeling it. So without further ado, here's my metalhead, powerlifting older brother whose voice will probably crack over the course of his speech.
2014 was not my best year. Everything started out fine until Derby night, when all my friends and I were playing pickup basketball at Quentin's house. We were getting competitive, and the game continually became more and more aggressive. And before I continue, let me describe Quentin's basketball court for those of you who have not been to his house. His basketball hoop is brilliantly placed right outside his garage doors, on a retaining wall, as his home is on a hill. To the right of the basketball court is a good 12 to 15 foot drop-off, but the only thing to prevent someone from falling is a 1.5 foot brick wall. So as the game went on, a missed shot sent the ball bouncing towards the edge. I was racing for the ball when suddenly I began sliding in my Sperry's. Next thing I know, I'm flipping off this retaining wall backwards. The back of my legs got caught on the bricks, and the only thing I could do was to try to right myself in the air. I fell through the trees, tearing all the branches off, and I landed on my side. While the air was up and knocked out of me, it gave everyone a good laugh, and we kept playing. Falling off backwards was wild, but since everything was fine, I brushed it off. Later that night, after leaving Quentin's house, my dad and I made a stop at Walgreens. As we were driving, we came to a stop at a red light at the intersection of Brownsboro and Chenoweth. My dad was making awful and annoying jokes while I was still recuperating from the fall. I began hoping that the misery would end. That night, I learned to be careful what you wish for. What happened next just added to one of the scariest days of my life. We were rear-ended by a minivan going at least 50 miles an hour. From a dead standstill, we were knocked 30 feet into the intersection. On the lacrosse field, I've checked guys that still remember my hits to this day. And I've been hit so hard before that my checks have been put to shame, but nothing is compared to the shock of this car wreck. After a few minutes of watching my dad rage at this poor guy, thinking he was intoxicated, we began to see smoke pour out from under the hood. While the other driver was not drunk, he clearly was in shock from the incredible impact, so my dad and I had to get this guy out of the vehicle. As we were walking away from the van, it burst into flames. He was already distraught because of what he had just done, but he was even further traumatized when he realized that thousands of dollars worth of camera gear was sitting in the car while it was burning up. My Jeep was drivable, but it was immediately apparent that it would take weeks in the shop to repair it to normal. The difference between the two vehicles is that my Jeep had heavy, intense metal frame, but his minivan did not. My car's frame was fine. His car was totaled. Coincidence? I think not. Moving forward 3 weeks, my struggling year continues. This time around, my family and I were having dinner with two of my closest friend families, the Smiths and the Silers. As fate would have it, Campbell Siler was not able to make it to the dinner after a rough baseball practice. After eating, Parker Smith and I were chilling and playing video games when we decided to go for a quick car ride, as Parker just got a new Infiniti. Spur of the moment, we decided to go to my house, just a few minutes away by car. We were driving down Mockingbird Valley Road at around 11 o'clock, and this road is poorly lit and in horrible condition. We were driving too fast, and the S-curve was rapidly approaching. We went into the curve without slowing down to an appropriate speed, and we drifted around the turn. Well, up until that point, I wasn't overly concerned. After veering into the opposite lane, I knew that we were in trouble. After overcorrecting, we sped head-on into the first tree, which hit directly in front of the passenger side. Given our speed, the car's momentum spun the vehicle in the air, wrapping it around another tree, crushing the driver's side inwards onto Parker. After landing about 15 feet away from the second tree, I immediately realized how bad the situation was. While you can see tons of gruesome incidents on TV or the internet, you don't get the horrible smells of the antifreeze pouring onto the ground, the constant blaring of a horn shorting out, the pieces of glass being crushed into your skin and hair, or the sight of your friend's blood on your own body. Nothing compares to actually seeing your best friend dying there right beside you while you're basically helpless to do anything about it. The first thing I did when I knew I had to take action was to check myself out first. I performed a quick self-assessment for any substantial wounds, and miraculously, the most significant injury I sustained was a dislocated shoulder. After looking at the car a few days later, it seemed as if there was a protective bubble around the passenger seat. I hopped out of the car and saw liquids pouring out into the road. I remembered what had happened in the car wreck on Derby night, and at that moment I was sure the car was going to catch on fire. I quickly called for help, but connection in that area is very unreliable. However, I managed to contact my dad. He called 911, but because of the bad connections, we had to wait around 20 minutes before EMS arrived. While I was waiting for help to show up, a woman drove up to the scene. I was relieved that someone was there to ease my mind if nothing else. But out of nowhere, this woman starts yelling at me, saying, "You go to collegiate. You should know better than that. Shame on you." I didn't realize that wearing a collegiate shirt would have made a difference. She quickly got back in her car and drove away, leaving me alone at the scene. I'll never forget hearing Parker's cries as he went out and out of consciousness while waiting for help to arrive. Shortly thereafter, my dad, Ms. Smith, and the Silers arrived. It was heartbreaking to see Mr. and Mrs. Smith arrive on that scene to witness their only son gravely injured. Finally, when EMS arrived, they began extracting Parker from the car using the jaws of life and confirmed that my shoulder was dislocated. After my quick triage, my adrenaline was surging and I successfully popped my shoulder back into place. When they removed Parker from the wreckage, they put both of us in the same ambulance. The EMTs had to use a technique developed in combat to quickly get fluids to Parker, where they had to drill a hole in his leg bone. No one should ever have to hear those sounds that I heard on that ambulance. Upon arrival to the hospital, Parker's vital signs collapsed, and they rushed him into emergency surgery, and they discovered the extent of his internal injuries. This was the first of what would be many major surgeries over the course of about 8 months. Overall, he broke all the ribs on his left side, a rib on his right side, his pelvis in 4 places, his collarbone, and both bones in his left forearm. His spleen was also split in half and had to be removed. The flesh on his left arm was degloved. He had another concussion to add to the list of previous concussions, had kidney damage, and he had contusions all over his lungs. It was with God's grace that Parker is still here with us today. While I was getting my shoulder checked out by an orthopedic surgeon a few days later, the surgeon determined that my shoulder was actually about 75% dislocated, and that it was due to my shoulder strength that the dislocation was not as bad as it would have been otherwise, which could have led to multiple possible surgeries and rehab. So moral of the story, get under that barbell in our collegiate weight room, start strong with 5x5 program, and lift heavy. After living through this nightmare, I was looking forward to starting my senior year cross country. Unfortunately, I had some more bad luck. After running a cross-country practice, I went out to watch and support the soccer team. However, while I was out there with the Assumptions fields, I noticed some strange things going on. I was having a hard time talking and swallowing, and to a certain extent breathing. I was a little worried driving around, especially since I had 2 passengers with me. But at this point, the symptoms weren't bad enough to raise alarms. I went out to the Buffalo Wild Wings with a few friends, but I could hardly even eat, even though I was famished. At this point, I was slurring my words, and I was physically unable to raise my voice. The symptoms were gradually getting worse, and when I got home, my parents thought I had broken my nose because of how funny I sounded. We eventually decided that going to the emergency room was the best course of action to take, where I was eventually diagnosed with a spontaneous pneumothorax and a partially collapsed lung. A spontaneous pneumothorax is where there's a small rupture in the lungs, where air leaks out into the chest cavity and can surround the heart, the esophagus, the larynx, and the lungs. This is relatively uncommon in tall, lanky males, which is just another reason you gentlemen, particularly Daniel Rowland, should get onto Strong Lifts 5x5 and sculpt your bodies. Anyways, this led to me missing school and falling behind. After following the doctor's orders of easing back into cross country after 2 weeks, I was stricken with the first of 2 lung infections, with both of these holding me back even more. At this point, I couldn't seem to get a break, and I've never felt so discouraged, but life is 10% what happens to you, 90% how you react to it. In closing, you never know what life will throw at you, but there's several things you can do to be prepared for anything. You can listen to metal, you can lift heavy, and be thankful for every day you have because it can be taken away.